Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Jim Martin from the United States. Pleased this evening to be able to introduce Dr. Stephen Koza. Steve is a professor of psychiatry at the Uniform Services University in Washington, D.C. He serves as the associate director there for the Center for the Study of Traumatic Stress. Steve is a retired Army officer. He graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and received his medical degree from George Washington University. Steve has completed a residency in general psychiatry and a fellowship in child and adolescent psychiatry from the Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington. Um, Steve's professional interests are in the area of clinical and community response to trauma and the impact of deployment and combat injury, illness, and death on military service members, their families, and their children. We will post Steve's full bio and contact information in the chat a little bit later in this session, so it will be available. Today, we hope to focus on the topic of grief and mourning as it's experienced by soldiers engaged in combat operations. And we hope that all of you will share your own experiences that relate to this topic, either directly with your work with military units or with soldiers who have returned from the front, but especially sharing those things that relate to how leaders can best engage with the grief and the mourning, supporting their own soldiers. So, with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Steve Koza. Andrei, let me first, Andrei, if there's anything that you would like to add to my introduction?
No, I think that it was a great introduction. This is a very important and relevant topic. We can see it by the number of the participants. So thank you. And we can start.
Okay, go ahead, Steve. The floor is yours.
Well, Jim, thank you for that kind introduction. And it's a pleasure for me to be here today to be talking about grieving in combat zones. I want to, obviously, a very sobering topic. And just want to make a couple of comments to start off that this is work that I've been involved with now for a number of years, examining the impact of grieving on adults and children who have lost loved ones in a number of different ways. And my goal today is to be sharing some fundamental and basic information with you all that I thought might be helpful for us in thinking together. Although I have been studying the topic of grief now for some time, I clearly respect the fact that those on this call have a lived experience in understanding whether it's personal experience with grieving in a combat zone or having worked with individuals who have done that. So bringing that lived experience to this discussion today, I think, is very important. So what I would like to do as we are moving through the slides is to take opportunities to stop on occasion and to enlist discussion from members of the audience about your own experiences, because I see this, while I may have certain expertise in this area, I see this as an opportunity for learning for all of us in terms of understanding what challenges people have had, the experiences that they've had, and how we can learn and grow together, particularly to help people, soldiers who are managing with these experiences within the combat zone. So, Erin, if you could go to the next slide, please. So this is a slide that essentially says that my thoughts and and comments here reflect my own opinions and are not those reflecting those of the policies of the Department of Defense or the Uniformed Services University. Next slide. So very basically, what is grief? Grief is the emotional, physical, and behavioral response after being bereaved of a close loved one. So someone who we have great feelings about, that we care for. It can be a family member, it could be an intimate partner, it could be a colleague, it could be anyone in our lives that are important to us. The emotional, physical, and behavioral, and the focus here is that it's not just emotional, but we can have a variety of different responses when we've lost someone that we care about that can profoundly impact us. What we do understand that grief represents is a disruption of attachments. So we are beings that develop close attachments and connections with others in our lives, and those attachments are critically important to us. So the way we relate to other people in the world, how we develop those relationships and manage those relationships within our life are deeply connected to who we are. So as we lose those important people in our lives, it's almost as though, or can feel as though, something's been ripped from us. And that experience, grief, can have profound effects. So this quotation is one that I've gotten from a colleague of mine, Kathy Shear, who practices at Columbia University. Grief is the form that love takes when someone you love dies. It is the emotional, physical, and behavioral response that comes with that loss and disruption of attachment. It can lead to profound emotional responses like shock, disbelief, yearning for the deceased, longing, sadness, anxiety, anger, any one of a number of feelings, including suicidal thoughts. It can result in physical symptoms like fatigue, cognitive changes, immunological changes, and we know that grief, particularly in older people, can actually, especially with the loss of an intimate partner, can lead to increased mortality for those who are bereaved. And then finally, changes in behavior that may have to do with disrupted sleep, isolation, avoidance, or in some circumstances, increased substance use. Next slide. So acute grief is the emotional, physical, and behavioral reactions that occur immediately following the death of the loved one. It's the initial response to bereavement. Again, intense yearning, longing, sorrow can include feelings of disbelief, difficulty comprehending the reality, insistent, distracting thoughts of the deceased, trouble focusing attention and forgetfulness, a loss of a sense of self or sense of purpose, feeling aimless, feelings of incompetence, loss of feelings of well-being, or feeling disconnected from other people and ongoing life. We have to remember that all of us experience grief at some point in our lives, and it can be profoundly impactful. So these are not pathological responses. This is what we anticipate happens to people after we lose someone that we're close to. The most important point that I want to make as it relates to the idea of being in a combat zone when this happens is its impact on functioning. So one can imagine with these intense emotions, the distraction, the cognitive changes, difficulty in focusing, forgetfulness, loss of a sense of purpose can make it profoundly difficult to function under circumstances like this when it occurs in an environment like combat, where in fact we are needing to be on high alert, highly vigilant, and ready to be responding in ways that are required because of working living within a combat zone. Next slide, please. Okay, so focusing on the challenges of grieving in combat, and after I go through this slide, I want to get thoughts from members of the audience here. The challenge is that there's little time to address grief. So in regular life, when someone we love dies, we take time. We take time off. We need to be with others. We need to participate in rites and rituals that allow us to memorialize and remember that person. Depending upon the nature of the relationship, we may take weeks off of work in order to pay attention to grief, give it the time that it needs in order to be able to move forward in our grief. But in the combat zone, there isn't necessarily time for that, for self-reflection, addressing emotional responses, coming to terms with the loss. And so there's a need for compartmentalization. We need to be able to isolate ourselves from a certain perspective, from those feelings, in order for us to be able to carry on with the mission, in order to be able to continue functioning in ways. So it requires us, in essence, to stay disconnected from the grief in a certain way, or at least to the degree that we can, so that we can remain functional in a lethal environment where survival requires that. The other thing that is challenging related to grieving in a combat zone is, in most circumstances in our lives, when we lose someone that we care about, we lose them in single doses. It happens to one person. And then we have the time to be able to address it and reflect on it. In large-scale combat operation environments, such as those that are going on now in Ukraine, it's not just one loss that a unit member may experience, but multiple losses that are occurring. So it is the multiplying effect of the loss, death, and grief that can affect individuals. That is unusual for us, but also is not unusual based upon being in a combat zone. The other thing that we've learned over time is that there are certain types of death that are more challenging in terms of adapting to grief. And those are typically what we refer to as sudden and violent deaths. And that has to do with the fact that there may be several things, both in terms of the unexpected nature of the death. In a combat zone, it may be the proximity, the closeness that we have with a comrade that is standing next to us or is across the street who is killed, and we witness those deaths directly, that can be profoundly impactful. It can lead to exposures, traumatic exposures to dead bodies, or exposures to bodies that have been traumatized or severely damaged, that can be also very painful for an individual in a combat zone to experience. And then, because of the nature of the death and how it occurred, or questions about what happened or how it happened, it can lead to confusing questions or preoccupations about what happened in the death. It may result in powerful feelings related to attribution that complicate our understanding. It's not just about grief, but it might be about a feeling of guilt about what I was unable to do in order to protect my friend under these circumstances. It may have to do with a feeling that they were not protected by our own troops in terms of what happened to them, or it may be very angry feelings related to the enemy and the circumstances in which it occurred. So blame, anger, and guilt are powerful feelings that sometimes can make things more problematic in managing with grief. And the last thing I'll mention here too is that when we lose a friend in combat, it also activates our own sense of fear and the reality of the fact that death occurs on the battlefield, and it can lead to our own fears about our own well-being and our own our own safety, our own survivability on the battlefield. So these are all challenges that in some ways are unique to experiencing loss in the combat setting. So let me stop and see whether or not there are thoughts, whether these comments or others, as you've experienced or heard from your colleagues or comrades related to grieving in the combat zone, that would be important for us to be thinking about. Does this reflect that range, or are there other things we need to be thinking about as well?
Aaron, can you take the slides down for a moment so that people can be seen? And I would encourage as many of you who are comfortable opening your screen so that we're able to see you, that you do that. Steve, back to you.
So other thoughts? Any comments about unique challenges related to grief in the combat zone that people want to bring up or put into the chat or speak up and identify? I'm assuming these are experiences. Yes.
I think one of the most traumatic and dramatic loss is when your comrade missed in action, and when there is impossibility to take their bodies. And it was period in my service where during the, I think, 2-3 weeks, I lost a few comrades in such in a mission, and then in parallel, I lost my friend, very close friend. So he was serving in a totally different unit, and I catch myself that it's that at that time, because it's like happens almost in one time, everything, all these losses, and like these ambiguous losses. So you cannot really process anything. So I felt, and I catch myself that I stuck in this freezing state, in this some sort of denial and freezing state. So not really being able to start any emotional grieving, like sadness, crying. I did not cry and still did not cry. And when it happens, like, so comrades, like, okay, I got some attachment to the comrades, but of course my close friend was the most, let's say, like closest one, you know. And at the same time, it was in this matter, it was like equal, you know, equal denial, equal freezing state, and like very strange. It's like you still keep this not really start. And friendly fire, I would also address friendly fire. That one of the, I think, losses that hard to process. And yeah, and one accident I was witnessing when the comrade was, like, probably he was killed, but body was not evacuated, and then enemy took the body, and he took his phone with himself on the battlefield, and then on the PIDAR Telegram channels, a lot of photos of comrades start to appear, you know. And I could see that comrades were feeling the mixed, ambivalent feelings, you know, like it's, of course, like sadness, grief, but at the same time, it was anger about him that he make them expose to Russian Telegram channels, and their families can be in danger, you know. So this also security issues can be also very important. Thanks.
It's very, Oleh, thank you very much for sharing that. I mean, a number of really important things you mentioned, particularly the overwhelming feeling and almost like dissociative effects of being um, of being attempting to process something that feels like it's impossible to process, whether it has to do with, again, the loss of a close friend or the multiple losses that occur that can be so challenging, and also the need to put some of it aside almost in a self-protecting way, that because it's almost too much emotionally to be able to process it or to know how to process it. The other point, and maybe you could say a little bit more about this, is you had mentioned the inability, I think, to be able to recover the remains of comrades on the battlefield. Is that a comment that you had made initially? And we know that, you know, caring for human remains is an powerfully important human experience. To feel like we can recover and care for remains honorably and respectfully, to not be able to do that is has its own set of emotional consequences.
Yeah, and partly maybe I will go to some sort of interventions, but partly I was making some maybe substitution to this human remains, because I was responsible, I'm still is responsible for sending some belongings to the families. And this like part of some sort of, you know, giving something, you know, and doing something to help the families to grieve, or at least, you know, I don't know, like yeah, get some energy of their close one. And unfortunately, I did not make last will with some comrades, because in my experience it's helpful. But maybe when we will talk about some interventions, I can discuss more. And I open everybody to discuss.
No, very helpful. I think there are some things coming into the chat that I don't know if Aaron, it looks like you had made an English interpretation. Unspecified loss is truly freezing because the person who has disappeared is physically absent but mentally still present, making grieving impossible. So that speaks to this concept that Oleh had mentioned, ambiguous loss. When we, you know, that's a concept that a number of people in the States and elsewhere have referred to, where, you know, there is an unclear sense of the loss, that the person, it's unclear, first of all, maybe if they're alive or dead, or coming to terms in a real way about the loss of the person because of the lack of the ability to actually understand and recognize. So we have long-standing history and military history, particularly in World War II, where in the United States, there were over 70,000 service members that died in theater and were never recovered. And this was extremely difficult, both for comrades, but also for family members to come to terms. And so under those circumstances, people can start creating their own stories about what they think happened that may or may not be actual or true, to try to make sense of the absence of that person. And it's challenging because it makes it difficult to come to some clear determination of the reality of the loss, when we don't have a body necessarily to confirm the death. There is another comment that Aaron translated: the mutilated bodies of our brothers, which need to be collected piece by piece. So we know in the United States, and our center has done quite a bit of work with mortuary affairs officers, and whose job it is in the U.S. Army to manage human remains of those who've died on the battlefield. And that is an extremely painful and powerful experience in terms of creating risk for traumatic exposure just because of what they may witness. And especially with bodies that are mutilated or injured in some kinds of ways. So there are strategies to manage with that. There are certain things that looking at faces, looking at hands, we know tend to personalize the experience of managing with human remains. So finding ways in which we can reduce exposure to human remains that personalizes it is a way that we can protect people from being traumatized when they are involved in those activities. When it is someone that you know, and it's your responsibility, maybe as a unit member, to collect those human remains, that clearly can be powerfully disruptive and challenging. And it sounds like that's experience of some on this call as well. And I'm reading through any other people would like to speak up about this. The hardest thing for me is the uncertain loss of a combat comrade and my own powerlessness to stop this war. So the sense of helplessness that can come up under circumstances, particularly when we lose people that are important to us. So, yes, go ahead. I see two hands up.
Петро, можеш говорити.
Доброго дня.
Good day.
Дякую. У мене є один
Thank
коментар
you.
і одне
I have a
питання,
comment
якщо
and
можна.
a question, if possible.
Питання такого
So
характеру,
the
якщо
question
мене
is,
чути.
I hope
З
the
самого
sound
початку своєї
works well.
доповіді ви почали з того,
In the
що
start of your
це
presentation,
ваші
you
особисті
mentioned
погляди на
that
горювання,
these
і вони можуть
there was a
мати
disclaimer that these are your
якісь
personal
розбіжності з
ideas
офіційними
on grieving,
поглядами.
which do
Якщо
not
це
necessarily
я
reflect
правильно
the
вас зрозумів. Чи можу я вас
official
запитати,
ideas
які саме
of the
розбіжності ви
ministries?
маєте з
So,
офіційними поглядами
what kind of
Міністерства
discrepancies you
оборони
may
чи
have
когось
with the
Я
Ministry
буду
of
вдячний вам
Defense?
за відповідь.
So what
Це перше.
particularly did you mean by that disclaimer?
Коментар
This is
такого
the
роду.
first
Я
thing,
вдячний Олегу
and also
Хуковському за його
I would like to say,
коментар
to make a
розлогий.
comment.
Я хочу
Thanks to Oleg for
сказати,
his,
я з
to
ним
Oleh Hukovskyi,
повністю
who
згідний.
commented. I totally agree
Я
with
хочу
him.
сказати про ще одну таку
I would like to
проблему,
mention
можливо.
one more challenge,
Коли
possibly,
втрата йде після того,
when
коли
the
ти
loss
примушуєш людину виконувати
comes
те, що він повинен був виконати.
after you instruct
Ти
the person
примушуєш людину
to do
виконати
his job.
завдання,
So you tell this
з ризиком
person to
для
go
життя, він йде,
and do their
виконує,
job with a risk to
після
their
цього не
life,
повертається.
then he goes to fulfill the task
І
and
я
he
думаю,
doesn't
що
come
це
back.
теж
So I think this is
дуже складна
also
ситуація.
a very difficult situation.
Дякую.
Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. My comment about disclaimer is really a standard one that we always are required to include at the beginning of a presentation. Not that there are any specific discrepancies per se, but that it's important for me to state just in terms of any presentation I give that what I am presenting should not necessarily be construed as the official policy or opinion of the federal government or the Department of Defense. That doesn't mean that what I'm saying is discrepant from what the Department of Defense's policy is. It's just that I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for the Department of Defense. So there was nothing specific there that I was referring to. The other comment made, I think, is a really important one because that what you're referring to, I think, is particularly for people in positions of responsibility, in terms of being responsible for guiding younger soldiers or soldiers under a unit or a command to be involved in activities, and then something happens to them as a result, that can lead to a lot of feelings and potential responsibility, feelings of responsibility for the death, and in some circumstances, even feelings of guilt that can come about having asked a soldier to do something that then resulted in them dying. And so the question is, how do we then make sense of that? How do we come to terms with that? And I don't know if you have thoughts about it. We could certainly discuss it just in terms of an understanding that we understand this is part of our jobs in the military, to be working together. We know that a unit leader's responsibility is in some ways to send a person into harm's way for the purposes of completing a mission, and reflecting and reminding ourselves that the purpose in doing that is not to get them to be hurt, but to complete the mission, recognizing that all members of the military understand that's part of the job, that's the shared mission that we have, and that regardless of our level of responsibility in a particular unit, we come to understand that that's part of what we need to do, that a senior person directs and orders, and the junior person obeys the order. We do everything that we can as leaders to protect the people under us, but we can't guarantee their safety. And that's the challenge. But we need to remember that, because otherwise we can become more consumed with that sense of responsibility for the death or guilt about the death, when we need to stay focused on the fact that it is part of the work that we do, that people during combat are in a position of putting themselves and others in harm's way, not to get them to be injured, but recognizing that that can in fact be an outcome. But I think that's a powerful observation and a painful one.
Are there other thoughts or experiences that any of you would like to share?
May I join? I want to say to you, gentlemen, that we have a specific problem with continuousness of losses. And this is a complex trauma for many of our soldiers, because they have lost not only one or two or 10 at once, but every day, week, or month. And at my observation, sometimes the feeling of denial, feeling of not accepting of it, a freezing of emotional parts, it's what remains after these losses. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, again, an important and powerful, you know, we are human beings, and so we are, of course, affected by these profound effects that happen around us, especially when they are multiple losses and multiple effects. We will talk a little bit later about leaders' responses to losses. I guess under circumstances like this, my question would be for the present speaker or others, what kinds of things happen in situations like that? Are there opportunities for a unit, say, that has been profoundly affected by multiple losses to step back and to take at least some amount of time to recognize and to integrate the experience in ways that allows the group within the unit to come to terms or some terms and be prepared to go back to fighting when necessary? Are units allowed at least some time to rest after having had the experiences of multiple losses?
It depends, I say, but we need to do our job continuously, and there is not forever an option to take a break, unfortunately.
Right. The realities of war will dictate that. Yeah. There was a question here: how to get a soldier out of a state of emotional freeze in combat conditions. In the United States, very often what that will mean is there's the acronym PIES, which is proximity, immediacy, and expectancy, meaning that that we understand death being one of them, but also any one of a number of traumatic exposures that can occur during wartime that can be overwhelming and keep a person from being able to function. Under those circumstances, what we generally try to do is to give people a brief period of time of rest, helping them recognize that their stress response is understandable. We work to get them to sleep with the expectation that we know that this is going to be temporary and that they are going to be returning to their unit and returning to duty. So both a break. So there's a term that is used in the U.S. called 3 hots and a cot, meaning give them a couple of hot meals and an opportunity to sleep for a day or two, but with the expectation that they would return to their unit. And I know there are no simple solutions here. I think that's the other thing that's important to say, that these are profoundly difficult experiences that you all are describing, that would be true for anyone. And so there's no simple way of managing with them, but finding ways in which people can be given the opportunity to rest, or in terms of what a commander might be able to do, to say, we are not going to be able to take a break now. We've got to get through the next 3 days or the next week, but we will, as a unit, take some time at some point to be able to take a break, rest, reflect on this before we go back into the fighting. So marking it as something that we know is important to do, and when we have the opportunity, we will rest. We will take care of ourselves and each other. Jim, do you want to move to the next slide?
Yeah, go ahead, please, for the sake of time.
Okay, so this does get us into what we refer to as grief leadership, because leaders play a critical role in addressing grief, and especially in circumstances where there are multiple losses within a unit. First, it's important for the leader to understand what traumatic grief is, meaning that when a person has been exposed to the death of someone or the death of multiple people in a combat setting, there can be profound waves of sadness and intrusive images based upon how the person died. So if there were visual images that a person had, they may be repeating. So under these circumstances, there can be both grief responses as well as post-traumatic responses with potential powerful impact on functioning. But it's important for a leader to be visible under those circumstances. And sometimes what's really important is to provide accurate and timely information, to give people information about what exactly had happened, the circumstances that happened, if there was culpability, if someone is responsible, kind of identifying and recognizing that. It does require, or leaders are in a position to be able to organize and participate in rituals. Now, rituals, there are times where there can be time available to do more elaborate rituals, but sometimes it may be just a moment of silence. It may be a way of putting together a small memorial within a number of minutes. It may be for whether it's culturally appropriate to say a few words as a group about the individual in terms of who they were, recognizing them. These are all ways of memorializing. The other important thing that a leader can do is sustain a sense of meaning and purpose. So what we're describing here, what a number of the comments have been about how this can undermine a sense of what am I doing here? What's the purpose of all of this? How do I make sense of it? How do I maintain a sense of staying connected to the mission and what we do? So leaders can be in a position of both recognizing the sacrifice, but also recognizing the importance of that sacrifice as it relates to what it is that a unit is doing in terms of the fighting, what we're fighting for. It's a horrible sacrifice, but it was in the context of that mission, completing that mission that we do together, and that what our comrade was a part of and felt important. So it can, one of the things about a combat death, in addition to the pain for those who witness it or part of the unit, is the sense that there's cause in the death, that there's something that was important and purposeful about what that individual was trying to do as it related to completing the mission. That can be a valuable way of pulling a group together, and that a leader can remind the group of as it reflects on and thinks about the person who died. It's also important that a leader attempt to quell any of the sense of blame or guilt or anger or attribution that's associated with that can come up as related to this, that framing this within circumstances that allows individuals within the unit to move forward without being plagued by powerful feelings that make the grief more difficult. That can be done in a number of ways, certainly relieving people of a sense of guilt. Talking, for example, the comment that was made earlier about a junior commander that sent someone in to do a mission and they were killed, helping that junior officer recognize that it wasn't their fault that this happened, relieving people of sense of responsibility that is unfair. But if there is culpability that is real, also talking with the unit about the importance of pursuing justice in terms of the justice that needs to be accounted for when in fact there was a loss that was not in fact that occurred because something happened that shouldn't happen. That we need to take ownership of those things, and that leaders need to represent that they're taking responsibility in ensuring that any appropriate attribution get addressed appropriately. or at least investigated appropriately. And that there's the importance of, again, focusing on the sense of mission and purpose, that girding the unit and allowing them to feel still connected to what they're doing so that they can move forward in ways that keep them feeling hopeful rather than feeling hopeless in the face of losses. And that can be extremely challenging, but again, an important part of leadership in being able to do that what we're doing here is meaningful. It's very difficult. We are pained by the losses that we experience, but we're still connected to what it is that we're doing because we think it's so important that we do this, that we continue doing it. That can bind people together in ways that helps them manage with the grief that they experience. So let's stop again and see if folks have thoughts about that. Have any of you kind of witnessed leaders who have been able to heal members of the unit in ways that were helpful, examples of that, or maybe examples that weren't so helpful, that would be important for us to identify as examples of both good methods and then methods we would want to avoid? Has anyone found themselves personally in the position of having to communicate with comrades in a unit to help ease the pain of those who've been impacted? Oleh.
Can I join? In my opinion, it's responsibility, one of responsibilities of the company level officers. And if it's a level of company commander or platoon commander or deputy of commander, if they care about their troops, the level of purposeness in this unit is higher, but and it is very crucial. So the commander grieves with his troops. It may be some little ritual, local ritual, and as my colleagues say before, it's very crucial to take the body of the soldier to our own.
I thank you for the comment. I had a little difficulty hearing at the end. I don't know if others had difficulty hearing again. You broke up a little bit. Could you say again the last part of that?
It's very crucial and it depends on the commander to take the body of dead soldier, fallen soldier, on our territory.
Okay.
If this task successfully, the unit morale is usually higher.
I agree with that. That makes sense. Oleg.
I can give good examples and bad examples. So good examples that if unit commander, like company commander or battalion commander, constantly like make some sort of debriefing with the troops and inform what was done what is doing, you know, so if like make some after action review, you know, and analyze why it was happened, and but also keep inform soldiers about what is going on, about if bodies are not possible to recover, you know, but what is like what is his action for to make it happen, so what is going on, so keep informing the troops. I think it's very crucial so they can keep some situational awareness. Good example, if unit commander can send a message to the family. It can be upon request from the family, but it can be also initiative from the commander, and like, you know, giving some short information that, you know, your relative or your close one, like was killed in action or missed in action, but make some connection. Unfortunately, in Ukraine, it's I would say it's even forbidden if unit is informing the families about the death of the soldier. So we have, let's say, special trained people in our recruitment center, local recruitment center, and they have to, you know, this break bad news. In my opinion, it's a bad idea, but because they don't really close with the soldier, but unfortunately we have this uh, like tradition, or by law we cannot be the first who inform, so we can respond after. And I think it creates impact on the families, and unfortunately I think we could make it less painful if it would be units who inform, you know. And another good example, I heard about one battalion commander who had a ritual. So after he saw that soldiers' bodies kept in this, how to say, mortuary like rooms, and so he make an order, and but his soldiers his soldiers' bodies were always transitioned from the hospitals and from this like mortuary, how you say, rooms, to specific place where is a very nice, let's say, white walls. So it's really nice, light place, and he has a ritual that all fallen soldier he spent. So it's like favel for the soldier. So he spent like half an hour, uh, like he spent half an hour, you know, like saying goodbye to the soldier alone. So, and this is like a ritual for every fallen soldier. So this is good examples, uh, and if the unit commander can make or organize some sort of box that can be sent to the families, like, you know, like military clothes, flag. So we don't have this American tradition with the flags, because I know that even flags that you give to the families, it should be produced in US. So it's even texture is like authentic, let's say. So we don't have this like strict tradition sending flags from the unit, but I was witnessing when flags with signature were with box of things and patches were sent to the families. It was also perceived in good way. Bad way when unit commander does not inform and try to insist for mission to continue. And I saw few examples where the whole unit, I would say, was broken because some guys were missed in action or killed in action, and commander was ignoring the loss totally. and he was insisting to continue the mission, not saying a word about what they lost. And I could see that a lot of people start to refuse the mission, and it was a whole of mess. So I think this is very bad examples. Thanks.
Thank you, Oleh. That was great examples. The U.S., by the way, similarly we have notification officers that notify families after a service member has died. A commander doesn't do that in the U.S. either, but the commander may engage the family after the fact, but the official notification.
And you have tradition when company commander, I think, writing letters to the families, yeah?
That is correct.
Yeah, yes. I think this is very good tradition, and I remember even in the movie Saving Private Ryan, yeah, it was in the end. So I think if our company commanders would write some letters, you know, it can also make more realistic their, you know, sense of responsibility and performing the mission.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the challenge to leaders might be lack of understanding. It may also be their own, not that I'm condoning or think this is good, but it may be their way of trying to protect themselves for not having to engage in those kinds of things. Although I agree with you completely that it's extremely helpful, not only for the families, but for the unit. Someone had made a comment in the chat earlier too about comrades sitting together and crying. So the one thing just important to remember, there's nothing that grief is best done not alone, but with others. So for people within a unit to share that sense of loss and to remember together, it is in fact its own ritual, its own way of making sense, and its own way of mutually supporting each other. Knowing that there's a way of relying on each other, caring for each other, that there are ways in which the unit takes responsibility at the leadership level and then also among the unit members. So all of that I think is tremendously important and valuable. It looks like someone else has their hand up, or a couple of people. Yes. I don't know how to call on people because I can't necessarily pronounce their names.
Oleh, can you do that? Can you call on them?
I raised my hand. I'm sorry, I can't use my video camera because I have a bad connection.
Please go ahead.
Людина просить сказати без камери.
Ask him to talk without camera because he has bad internet, please.
I wanted to comment on Oleg's words that in the Second World War, the unit commanders were writing letters to the family members. It was a relevant practice at that moment of time, but now we have a two-way connection. And in practice, every family is going through the grief in their own way. After losing a son or a husband, they have their own way bereavement. And in practice, family members sometimes start giving the feedback to the commander in such a way that he has to change his mobile phone, and the commander has to keep the functionality of the unit and not hiding from the family members who are cursing him every single minute. Thank you.
So as I understand it, the importance of being able to communicate with the family, but the commander could be at risk, say, if they had a cell phone number where the family understandably maybe wants more and more information, but can burden the commander with numerous phone calls and contact that make it difficult for him or her to do their job. Let's see, is it Nord?
Вибачте. Ага, дякую.
I'm sorry, this is Petro.
Просто думав
I was just thinking
процесі цієї розмови
in the
трошки.
process of the
І
discussion,
розумію, що з одного боку,
and I
я не
understand
знаю,
that
як в
on the
вашому
one hand,
підрозділі.
I'm not
Ті
sure
підрозділи, що
what the
я
situation
бачив,
is in your units, but in those
багато
units that I
солдат,
saw,
офіцерів уникають
a lot of
теми
soldiers and
смерті взагалі.
officers are trying to avoid the
Це
topic
як
of
в
death altogether,
якихось то
like in some
структурах
archaic
казати про чорта не можна,
old
бо ми
times
тим самим
structure.
викликаємо того самого
You
чорта.
don't have to mention
І
the
казати про
devil
якісь то речі. Я
because
колись
you're sort of
у
summoning the
22-му
devil.
році пробував ввести
In
цю останню волю
2022,
солдата, якщо
I
ви
was
пам'ятаєте,
trying
про що я
to
говорю,
implement
колеги.
the last will of the soldier,
Там
if
було,
you remember
звісно,
what I'm
багато про
talking
смерть,
about.
про
Of course, it was
і мої
very much
офіцери
about
поряд,
death,
вони відчутно
and
злякалися.
my officers
Сказали,
near
ні,
me,
слухай,
they got scared.
це
They
нам не
told me,
потрібно, це
no, we
нам не
don't need
підходить,
this.
не кажи про це.
It doesn't suit our
Це
purposes.
перше,
Don't
а
mention
по-друге, я
this.
подумав ще про
This is
командира і
the first
про,
point. Also,
мені
I
знайомо
think
щось таке,
about the unit
що
commander,
як це виносити
and I
загиблу
know
людину
what it is, how it is to
з поля
carry
бою.
the dead body from the
І
battlefield.
я хочу сказати, що іноді командиру треба
I
прийняти
want to say
рішення не
that
виносити
sometimes
цю
the
людину,
commander has to
не
decide
виносити
to
і
leave the
дати
body
бути
in the
поганим
field
об'єктом, якщо я вже таку термінологію тут
and
можу
to,
собі
to
дозволити.
play the bad guy,
Поганим об'єктом, який каже, що ви
to
це
be
не
the bad
робите.
guy who has to
Може
say that you
втратити
don't have
набагато
to carry
більше.
the body because we can lose
Ми можемо
more soldiers.
втратити всю евакуаційну команду, ми можемо
We can
втратити
lose
багато
the
людей,
evacuation
тому що
team.
ми зараз
We
будемо
can lose
виносити
a lot of people
одного чи
just
двох
because we
таких
attempt to carry
І
one or
це
two
теж
or
треба
three
казати, що
bodies
командир
of deceased
повинен мати
people.
сили
And we need to
бути
mention this as
поганим в
well.
даний
The
момент, щоб
commander
зберегти
has to have the
життя
strength to be the bad guy,
тих,
but
кого
to
він не
save
може
the lives
захистити.
of
Дякую.
those people who are still alive. Thank you.
Again, thank you for those thoughts. I think one of the things, especially in that last example that you gave, is really it's the tremendous conflict that the commander and maybe unit members are in, where on the one hand, the desire to recover the body versus the desire to maintain the health and safety of people and how to come to term, because that's a conflict. Both of those things are important, and how to make the decision falls on the commander. The other point that you made regarding commanders or senior officers avoiding talking about death. We can understand, and I think Oleg gave a nice example of a unit that was torn apart by the fact that the commander did not address it, address the death and address the grief within the unit. Maybe one of the most important points of this conversation today is to understand the power of grief emotionally, and that it can't be ignored. It has to be addressed in some way. That doesn't mean there's only one way to address it, but finding a way that allows the command to communicate effectively, to memorialize, to provide some ritual that allows recognition of the individual, that doesn't necessarily need to take a lot of time, but makes the point of honoring the deceased is very important for unit cohesion. Otherwise, those feelings kind of can go underground in ways that can be very corrosive and lead to dysfunction in a unit. Yes, someone else has their hand up. I can see you're speaking, but I can't hear you.
I will speak from my telephone because I have a bad connection. So very often when you go to the units, when you visit the units after losses, mostly they are avoiding. They don't do debriefing, they are not analyzing the action, they don't mention this, they don't give the honor to the memory of the deceased people. And boys in those units have really bad feelings, but it really depends on the commander. Sometimes they are able to find times, sometimes they have obligatory evening prayer if the boys believe in God, or sometimes they just leave some things of this person if the family allows to do this. So my question is, how much time do you give the military people to rest in the combat situation when a person has an acute stress? And also I would like to ask you, unfortunately, we have the following problem. If the boys see somebody with acute stress, they can give him 3 to 5 days of rest. Then it starts, then everybody starts saying that I'm grieving, I can't do my job. So we call this boys aggravants, and then the entire unit crumbles down. What do you do in such situations? Thank you.
Right. Well, others on the call may have some thoughts about that as well, but I think you're right that, ensuring that people are given a certain amount of time, but also you don't want contagion of effect where then multiple members of the unit are, developing similar problems, and then you're losing the capacity of the unit to be functional. Generally speaking, this idea of expectancy, this concept of expectancy is important, which is that although there may be time for a day or two of break, that always the expectation is that the person is returning to the unit in order to be functional. In the U.S., I was talking to colleagues in Israel recently, in terms of having mental health present within the units, and I'm not sure the closeness with which there are embedded mental health providers. Oleg, maybe you can speak to that a little bit. The more that they are present close to the front, the more that individual soldiers can be managed closer to the front rather than having to be pulled back, or can even be managed within the unit itself. So the goal is to keep people as closely connected to the unit as possible, but there needs to be a balance between a person who just can't function and removing them for a short period of time with the expectation of return. I don't know if others have thoughts about that or experience, or Oleg, if you have experience from the mental health side with the Ukrainian military in terms of embedded mental health.
I can see the rising hand of Svetlana Frankev, or it was okay. Yeah, I can share one, I would say, good example of working with a unit company size, and they lost their commander. So company commander was killed at the battlefield. Thanks God. Like it was 2 years ago, so the ratio of bodies that can be recovered was much higher, and we were working with the unit, but we could work like where they the close place where they live, in the village where they live close to the front line. I was working with my colleagues, military psychologist. So we were providing, and part of the unit was in the place, but part continued the fight. So we were working several times, like with different parts of the unit, so everybody could get support. And And I got few lessons for myself about this work, because we managed to make, I think, 2 or 3 psychological debriefings, and after that we have religious rituals in Ukraine, like at the 9th day and the 40th day and the first anniversary. It's some sort commemoration days for the fallen. And after debriefings, I organized military chaplain, and he came and make also religious ceremony for memory. But it was done like after, and like in a way together. So I think this combination, spiritual support and psychological support, is crucial. And during the debriefing, so I was focusing on few questions. So one of the question was, who was this person for you? And it was interesting, like he was very good guy, and he had even call sign good guy, you know. And a lot of people did not know his real name, so he was known only by his call sign. So for me, it was also their perception. They have this some sort of symbolic perception of commander as like good father, you know. So in a way, they don't really know him real, but they like just love him, you know. And very often he said to them, I love you, you know. Like, so he was very loved guy, let's say, and everybody loves him, but they love also some sort of symbolic figure. And then we were talking a little bit about him, who is he, about his family. So everybody start collecting the information about him, you know, who he is as a real person. Then I asked, uh, uh, what is his unfinished things? So how you can process your grief through some actions. So, for example, you can take care about his kids, you know, or about his grave. You can visit his grave. So people start also channeling their grief into some concrete actions that can commemorate their commander. And I think it was nice work, and many people were included, and then and what he wanted for you to continue, you know. And very often they say we need to continue to our fight, you know. So in a way, it was him was symbolically present in our circle, and they were addressing also to continue the mission, like he was still as some sort of invisible commander for them. And they answer. So it was not me who like saying them to continue the mission, but they were in a way reflect that they need to continue the mission, because this is what he wanted and what we are here for, you know. And it was important, and it's more, in my opinion, more adult responsible position, not just grieving and then become some sort of like victims or people who need to be taken care of, but like they come also to again back to their warrior identity, you know. And they lost one warrior, but they continue what is important now. Yeah.
That's a great example of, and it's a great example of how grief, to the degree that meaning can be brought to a death, that it can activate people, give people a sense of efficacy and purpose related to the death. That grief is much more painful when it feels meaningless, when it feels like there's meaning that can be drawn from it. And this is a leader. I mean, that was a leadership exercise, really, is in helping people connect to how that what would this person who we've lost, what would they have wanted? What was important to them? How do we keep moving it forward? Activates people in ways that keeps them healthy and forward moving. A great example. Thank you. Okay, I think we only have one more slide. So this idea of rituals and memorializing. So, you know, the idea of the importance of recognition, of recognizing the loss and the impact of the loss on the unit from a leadership standpoint. We know that in a wartime situation, that it may not be possible to do kind of elaborate rituals. You know, we're not doing funerals and things like that. That would be the case if we were not in wartime in terms of the way we took care of things and how we grieve together. But finding opportunities, even in small ways, of memorializing. Leaders also can note and mark the importance of the loss at some point. Say if a unit is in the middle of a mission that needs to continue and that there's not much time, there can still be an opportunity to take a few moments to recognize the loss, to speak to it, to share in the grief, even with the understanding that if we have to delay any significant ritual or memorializing, we can do it at a later time. But anything that is done to identify, to recognize, both memorializing the person who died and recognizing the grief of the experience who are surviving, is really important in order to metabolize the intense emotions that come with loss. I show a picture here. I don't know if in Ukraine you do something similar, but very often in the US, one of the rituals was to create what's called the battlefield cross that you can see in the photo, which was that the unit would come together in formation, even for a few minutes. And in the place of the soldier who died, they would put the boots, their weapon, and the helmet to recognize them as part of the unit, but also to recognize their and memorialize them and recognize their passing. So, and that might include something like a moment of silence. It might include the opportunity to share stories and memories. The leader is in a position to, one of the things that's important is to be able to recognize it in some ways, but also to, as Oleg was talking about, to keep the unit motivated for its purpose moving forward and connecting, you know, the importance of that person who died to what we're here for. This is what we're here for, to complete this mission. He or she was doing that. We value them as part of our unit, and we will continue to do that in honor of their service and their death. Are ways that we want to connect both the ritual and the memorializing with the meaning making. There can be other types, and perhaps others on this call have examples that have been done, even at times where they're not extensive or require a lot of time, but serve the purposes effectively of recognizing the person who died and allowing the people who are left in the unit a moment to recognize their grief and the impact on them. Why don't we go ahead and close that now and then see what comments individuals have. Oh, and then, yeah, maybe what I will say, since we are getting short of time, that acute grief is typically time limited, but there are challenges that come, you know, grief adaptation is sort of like wound healing. It takes time. It's real. It is not something that goes away immediately, but there are certain things that can occupy a person's mind that make it difficult. And that can have to do with strong emotions like guilt, anger, and blame. it can be a preoccupation with how the person died, whether it was a violent death, whether it involved destruction of the body. People can become preoccupied with what they perceive as the pain that the individual experienced. And so that can lead to both loss and traumatic reminders that make it more difficult. The other thing that we mentioned that's not on this slide that can make it difficult with grief adaptation is when there's an ambiguous loss, when it's hard to know exactly what happened. So it's hard to bring closure to the death. We have studied in US troops and we've documented what is called or referred to as prolonged grief disorder. So this is a disorder when people, rather than adapting to grief over time, which is the normative response, become preoccupied with the death for long periods of time, well over a year. Sometimes it's comorbid with post-traumatic stress disorder. But what we know is that it is responsive to grief-specific treatment. So for people who struggle ongoing and continue to have profound emotional responses to a death, say a year after, and have difficulty resolving it in their own minds, probably would benefit from some clinical treatment that focuses on that grief. So let me go ahead and stop here and allow in our last 5 minutes any kind of additional comments or questions related to those final topics or anything we've talked about today.
I think, sorry for interrupting, like, I think that is very good a ritual since the beginning of full invasion is a minute of memory, like it can also be said like a moment of silence, like every day at 9 a.m. We have a minute like of silence and remembering of everybody who was traffic stop and people go out from the cars, you know, and spend 1 minute for just in silence and remembering. And in some military camps, of course, it's impossible to make it like close to battlefield, but in some military camps like far from the battlefield, like this also combined with the formation, with the flag, and heads are down, you know, and then minutes of silence, and then anthem, and then like, so keeping this honor, so honoring their comrades and friends and everybody who died. And especially, so it's not only military who died, but also a lot of civilians, and especially the most painful probably it's the kids. So we lost more than 600 kids on this war. So, and this is very dramatic.
Thank you, Oleh. Yes.
Тяжко після Олега казати, він каже такі чуйні
So it's really hard to say something after Oleh because he's talking about such sensitive things. But what I thought about, like the units that I used to know, and so I didn't prevent them from doing this, but you know, that ritual was basically like, you know, they were just having a kind of a religious ritual where they would just sit together and eat and drink, and you know, according to the Ukrainian custom, like a funeral feast. So they would have a glass, you know, that was intended for this person who was killed in action. And I could just, sit next to them during this funeral feast. And it didn't look like any sort of a violation or anything.
I just wanted to make sure I understood. So did you think that was something that was helpful for them? Helpful? So this is like the cultural ritual. This is something that all Ukrainians know, but for some reason we don't bring this topic up. So after the funeral, usually after the funeral, we have the so-called funeral feast. They sit together at, one table, they eat and drink. And the mood can be different, of course, around this table, but it's not only in our culture, this funeral feast. That's what people do after the funeral in many cultures. And in those units where I, saw or where I served, also we had this tradition of having these funeral feasts. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, I will move.
So just to add to what was said by Petro, and I'll say this in Ukrainian, you mentioned the funeral feast. So when one of our brothers died, he had a call sign Bear, and he was a very merry, happy guy. And there were a couple of weird things that turned up. First of all, during the funeral, like before the funeral, some of his talents opened up. So he was very talented. He was a hospitalier, and also he was a carpenter. But another talent that we didn't know about was that he was writing poetry. So he really kept it to himself. He didn't share this. And one poem, so they were sitting at the front line, and he just recorded this on the video, and he asked not to show this poem to anyone while he is alive. So when he died, his comrade just showed it to other comrades, and they just played back this recording during this funeral. And I still have these goosebumps when I recall this, that was a very long poem, like how would like to live his life, what hopes he has for his family, etc. So we had this possibility to react to this. So a lot of people cried, and we didn't contain our grief, our tears, our emotions. But in the evening, we just got together for this, funeral feast, as you said, and that was a totally different atmosphere. And the room where we were sitting, it had a bear on its wall, so that was just a coincidence, of course. But when we came, and there was this bear on the wall, and that was, I was really laughing, and we were talking about him, recalling his jokes. We were making jokes, and we were just laughing like crazy. It was something unbelievable, and it was so that was the feeling that he was present there of our comrade. We didn't have a feeling that we were doing devaluating his memory or anything. That was a very profound, very spiritual experience. That was very, very deep. So that was a funeral feast. Yeah.
Sounds like it was very, very healing.
We are coming to the end of our time today. I'd like to be respectful of everyone's schedule. This has obviously been a very important topic, and we've had a very large number of participants. I'd like to make one comment, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Koza for any final thoughts. The one comment I would make for all of you, many of you who are working in your civilian community and not directly with units, that grief comes home, that many soldiers will bring back from their experience, as you know, some profound losses. And at various times, they may revisit that grief. And the role that you have as psychologists and mental health providers working with families and units is profoundly important. So I hope today's discussion helped enlighten some of the issues that we're talking about here. So, Steve, let me turn it back to you for any final comment you want to make.
Sure. Well, first of all, it was my pleasure being here, and I'm humbled to hear about the stories and the challenges that you all face in terms of working with soldiers and dealing with things as profound as death and multiple deaths due to combat. I think the other thing that I would just say is allowing us all to remember these are not simple things to figure out, that these are very challenging and difficult, and also being enacted under very difficult and stressful circumstances. So we, I think, have to approach this with a tremendous amount of forgiveness for ourselves and for others as we attempt to deal with tragedies that occur as part of war. There is no easy solution. And my last comment would be, I just hope you all receive some relief soon from this ongoing war in ways that provide peace in Ukraine.
Thank you all. We'll end today and hopefully reconvene in 2 weeks. So our love to all of you from the US, and as Dr. Koza has said, we wish you well. Thank you.